Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. During the Bishop's Fortnight for Freedom, what are lay people supposed to be doing? A new Catholic lay group has some ideas. MAUREEN Ferguson and Ashley McGuire from the Catholic Association are here. And he founded the Peace Corps and ran for president, but his greatest accomplishment may have been his role as a father. Tonight, we remember Sargent Shriver. His son, Mark Shriver, has written a tender memoir, which he'll discuss later in the show. If you would like to join the discussion, or if you have a question about health care or the Fortnight for Freedom, get your calls and emails in now. You can send those to worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get things started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Well, there was no health care ruling released today, but the Supreme Court of the United States on Monday struck down 3 of the 4 major components of the Arizona immigration enforcement law, known as SB 1070. The court did, however, unanimously let stand the key provision. It requires Arizona police to check the immigration status of anyone suspected of being in the United States illegally. In a 5-3 split, the High Court struck down Arizona's provision that mirrored federal laws, including forbidding undocumented immigrants from seeking or holding a job. In a statement, the U.S. Bishops' Conference applauded the court for striking down those sections of the law, but remains wary of what the court let stand. Archbishop Jose Gomez, writing on behalf of the bishops, said checking immigration status could lead to the separation of families and undermine the Church's ability to minister to immigrant populations. The conference further warned that the provision could lead to racial profiling and violation of civil rights laws. SB 1070 explicitly prohibits those actions. There were celebrations from Tahrir Square to Alexandria on Sunday as the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohamed Morsi, claimed the presidency of Egypt. He becomes the first Islamist to be freely elected as the head of a state anywhere in the world. Throughout the campaign year, the Christian minority in Egypt had expressed concern over an Islamist president and parliament, fearing a push for Sharia law and further persecution by the Muslim majority. In a statement, the White House congratulated President-elect Morsi and urged the new Egyptian government to respect the rights of all Egyptian citizens, including women and religious minorities. Morsi intends to make Sharia the law in Egypt, and his rhetoric has been ferociously anti-Israel. How much power the new Egyptian president will have remains to be seen, as the country's military leadership recently dissolved the Egyptian parliament. The military declared that it will be writing the country's new constitution. On Saturday, Pope Benedict XVI met with top Vatican officials concerning the VatiLeaks scandal. According to the Holy See press office, Pope Benedict focused on the document leak scandal at regularly scheduled meetings with the heads of Vatican offices. He also added a second meeting with 6 well-trusted cardinals in a bid to hasten and, quote, restore a climate of serenity and trust in the Curia. Further details of the meeting were not offered. 2 investigations are ongoing. The Vatican police continue their criminal inquiry into the leaks, and a commission led by 3 cardinals is tasked with an internal probe. Meanwhile, in light of overwhelmingly negative press received during the VatiLeaks scandal, the Vatican has made a key personnel appointment. On Saturday, the Holy See confirmed that it has hired former Fox News Rome correspondent Greg Burke as the newly created Director of Communications within the Secretariat of State at the Vatican. The former Time magazine and National Catholic Register journalist is charged with helping the Vatican craft and coordinate its communications strategy between the Holy See's offices and the press office. We wish Greg the very best. He's a fine journalist and a great guy. On Friday, a Philadelphia jury found Monsignor William Lynn, a former top archdiocesan official, guilty of child endangerment. Monsignor Lin, whose responsibilities included the assigning of priests to respective parishes, becomes the first church official convicted of his administrative actions in light of knowing of alleged sexual abuse by a priest. He was found not guilty on a second child endangerment charge for assigning priests accused of sexually abusing minors to other parishes. He was not found guilty of a conspiracy charge. Monsignor Lin served as secretary for clergy under the late Cardinal Anthony Bevilacqua from 1992 until the Cardinal's 2003 retirement. Cardinal Justin Regali reassigned Monsignor Lin in 2004. Sentencing is expected in August. He faces up to 7 years in prison. Staying in Philadelphia, this past week, the Archdiocese announced a number of deep budget cuts in the face of a projected $17 million deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. It will lay off 45 employees, consolidate 19 offices and ministries, and end publication of its 117-year-old newspaper, the Catholic Standard and Times. Archbishop Charles Chaput, who took over in Philadelphia less than a year ago, said he took the action with great reluctance, but it was necessary given the situation. Even with the cuts, the Archdiocese still faces a $5 million deficit. Archbishop Chaput has tasked his financial staff to balance the budget for the following fiscal year. And the legal saga continues over the Mount Soledad War Memorial Cross. On Monday, the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal to keep the 29-foot cross on public land outside of San Diego. An appeals court said the Mount Soledad cross represents an unconstitutional mix of government and religion. The High Court on 2 recent occasions plunged into disputes over the use of religious symbols to honor fallen veterans. In turning down the appeal, Justice Samuel Alito wrote that the denial does not amount to a ruling on the merits, and the federal government is free to raise the same issue in a later petition. And the U.S. Bishop's Fortnight for Freedom campaign for religious liberty continued this weekend. On Friday, Cardinal Timothy Dolan celebrated Mass at New York's St. Patrick's Cathedral. The Cardinal offered his reflections on the cherished first freedom.
We call it our first and most cherished freedom, don't we? And I'm talking, of course, about the freedom of religion. And last evening, on the vigil, we began a fortnight, 2 weeks of prayer in gratitude for that first and most cherished freedom, as well as seeking the Lord's shield of protection around this very fragile freedom. 2 weeks of prayer that obviously will conclude on the 4th of July. We call it our first freedom, not just because it happens to be listed as such in the Constitution, but because it is the very foundation of all our other liberties. You see, our rights, as the founders of our beloved nation often observed, our rights come from Almighty God, from our very makeup as one of His creatures. Our rights do not come from any earthly power or government. Therefore, no earthly power or government can take them away. If that first and most cherished of freedom, the freedom of religion, goes, well then, see, the other freedoms are in jeopardy because their grounding, their foundation has gone. St. John Fisher knew this as he refused to allow the encroachments of Henry VIII upon the sanctuary of conscience. St. Thomas More knew this as he proclaimed himself, remember, to be the King's good servant, yes, but God's servant first. And we know this. We know this, which is why we consider this first freedom the most cherished of them all, and why we commit ourselves to pray for it these 2 weeks. So I thank all of you. I thank all of you for accepting the invitation of your bishops to pray during these 2 weeks of prayer. Sometimes throughout our nation's history, we've had brave men and women have had to raise their hands in defense, to take up arms even to defend our sacred liberties. But today, we lift up our hands in prayer to thank God for them and to ask Him to protect them.
Be sure to watch continuing coverage of the Fortnight for Freedom here on EWTN, including a very special World Over Live this Thursday. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney will join me for an exclusive sit-down interview you won't want to miss. Bill Donahue will be here, and Marianne Glendon will react to the big Supreme Court health care ruling. That's this Thursday on the World Over. Tell your friends. Don't miss it. Finally, the nation's preeminent pro-life Democratic Party organization has weighed in against the federal contraception mandate. In a letter submitted to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Democrats for Life of America called the promised accommodation, which shifts the responsibility of providing free contraceptive coverage to insurers, insufficient conscience protection. The group urged the government to give meaningful, not minimal or grudging accommodation to conscience. Up next, what is the laity doing to promote religious liberty during this Fortnight for Freedom? MAUREEN Ferguson and Ashley McGuire of the Catholic Association will tell us and offer their suggestions when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over. The U.S. bishops kicked off the Fortnight for Freedom last Thursday with Mass from the Baltimore Basilica. But what is the laity's role in all of this? My next guests are part of a new organization dedicated to bringing a faithful Catholic voice to the public square. We're joined on set by MAUREEN Ferguson and Ashley McGuire of the Catholic Association. Ladies, thank you for being here.
So good to be
now,
with you.
Tell me, what is the Catholic Association, MAUREEN?
Well, in the bishop's document, this short little document on religious freedom, 7 times they repeated the call for the laity to come forward. So that's what we seek to do at the Catholic Association, is to encourage our fellow Catholics to come forward to stand up in defense of religious liberty and conscience rights. And particularly during this Fortnight for Freedom, we have a 14-point action plan. We're asking Catholics to take one simple item every day. It'll take you 2 minutes or less.
Okay.
Perhaps
We'll get into those in a moment.
Okay. Am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, don't jump ahead, MAUREEN.
Okay.
But now tell me, now some of my colleagues, as they've watched this unfold, they say the bishops, what this is really about, Ashley, is the bishops trying to deny women contraceptives and the freedom that they're entitled to and wrapping it in a religious liberty garb. Is that the case?
Absolutely not. And I've been so frustrated as this whole debate has unfolded in the way that a lot of people have tried to frame this as a war on women, or the Catholic Church trying to deny contraception to women. This is absolutely about religious freedom, and it has been from the beginning. And when I hear people say, oh, if you are opposed to the HHS mandate, then you're part of this war on women, I want to say, what women? I'm a woman, and I'm opposed to the mandate. And I know a lot of women, religious women, not religious women, who are opposed to the mandate. And frankly, I think it's objectifying to women to lump us all into one category as if we all think and vote alike on these issues. This is absolutely not a war on women, and it's in no way the Catholic Church trying to deny contraception to anyone by not wanting to pay for it.
If you have a question for the ladies, please give us a question or give us a call. Don't give us a question. Give us a question after you call. 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. Now, MAUREEN, the other thing we keep hearing, and I've heard it from a number of colleagues, is the bishops are engaging in partisan politics, that's what this is about. An election year that we're in the midst of, and this is the bishops trying to throw the election one way or the other. Your thoughts?
First of all, we don't give up our conscience rights just because it's an election year. Second of all, the issue of conscience rights has always been a bipartisan issue. In federal health care law, there have always been broad conscience protections included. President Clinton's health care bill had very broad conscience protection is very similar in principle and effect to what we seek now. They were supported by then Senator Ted Kennedy, then Senator Joe Biden even. So there's been a long history of bipartisan support for conscience protection and obviously for religious liberty. And also, the church has a right to speak up on these things because the church is a major player in, the church is the country's largest non-governmental provider of health care, of social services, charities, and education. And this is the sector that will be so radically affected by this HHS mandate.
So what are you asking the laity to do? Because a lot of people, they say, oh, there's a religious Fortnight for Freedom underway. We're to stand up for religious liberty. And I've gotten the emails. What are people to do with this?
I'd say first and foremost, the bishops have called the Fortnight for Freedom a hymn of prayer. So that's really important. And on our website, thecatholicassociation.org, we have this 14-point plan. Several of the points include prayer. Another thing we're hoping people will do is pick up the phone and call their member of Congress. I'll give out the number of the Capitol switchboard if that's okay in just a minute. But it's really important for members of Congress to hear from us, for those that agree with us, to hear our appreciation, and for those who disagree, to hear our very polite but persuasive points.
Run through some of your other recommendations for people.
Yeah, absolutely, Raymond. I would say social media is a big component of what we're asking people to do. I think as lay Catholics, it's important to recognize that is the direction of communication in this country, and we can look at something like the Susan G. Komen Planned Parenthood incident to see just how powerful social media can be. So we're really asking people to use their social media capabilities to get out the message of religious freedom during this fortnight as well.
Do you worry that Catholics have become too clerically minded? That they're so waiting for the bishops and the priests to take charge that the people in the laity kind of sit back in the pews and just, well, we're waiting. The bishop's doing his thing, so we'll just keep cheering him on and applauding from here in the pews, and they really don't fulfill what Cardinal Wuerl on this show a few weeks ago said. This is the laity's job to reach out into the world and to get involved in the political sphere.
I don't think so. And if anything, I think that the rallies that we've seen back in March and then again just a couple of weeks ago are really a testament to how active lay Catholics have been in mobilizing people all across this country. I mean, I spoke at the D.C. rally and I saw priests and nuns, but I saw the vast majority of the people that I saw were lay people. And they were also reaching out and getting non-Catholics involved. So, you know, they were organizing speakers who included some priests, but most of the speakers were actually lay people. So I think at least those rallies are a real testament to how the laity is stepping up and filling that public space.
We're getting a lot of questions, and they're very similar. A lot of them are asking if the Supreme Court of the United States next Thursday decides to throw out the individual mandate, which is just one portion of the health care law, what will that do to affect this HHS mandate, the contraceptive mandate that HHS has passed, requiring all employers to provide contraceptives, abortifacients, and sterilization services to their employees? People hear mandate, and they think it's the same thing. It's two separate things. The individual mandate, the HHS mandate.
I'm very glad you brought that up because it is confusing to people. If the court strikes down the individual mandate but leaves the rest of the law in place, that leaves in place the employer mandate, which includes the preventative services mandate, which includes the requirement that even religious organizations provide abortion-inducing drugs, contraception, and sterilization for free to their employees.
What is your gut on this, each of you? Where do you think the court's going to come down?
I would not hesitate to make a prediction on that.
It's so hard to know, but you know, I think that no matter which way the court rules, there's still an awful lot of religious freedom concerns that persist, conscience rights issues that persist. I mean, we just saw in Washington State pharmacists who, you know, by a hair succeeded in winning the right to not have to dispense contraceptives that include abortifacient potentials. So, and we've also seen what's happened to the bishops with their human trafficking work. So religious freedom is an issue that's not going to stop with the way the court rules on this
let's talk about that, because a lot of people have sort of pinned all of their focus and their hopes on the Supreme Court. And I'm sure many people are watching and thinking, well, if the court throws this out, either the whole law or a piece of the law, That'll take care of the religious liberty argument will be on the back burner. That's not necessarily the case.
It's not. Even if the entire bill is struck down, there have been very broad threats to religious liberty. Another example we could cite is the example of Catholic Charities, who is a gold-plated organization when it comes to so many things, particularly adoption. They've been pushed out of the adoption business in Washington, D.C., Boston, Illinois, and San Francisco simply because they're Catholic and they believe in placing a child with a mother and a father. So they've been pushed out of that sector. And there's kind of an ideology coming from this administration that says, you can have your right to worship. You can go into your little church on Sunday and worship God as you see fit, but don't come out into the public square as a Catholic to serve the poor, run your hospitals, and educate children. And this is a travesty because, as I've said, the Catholic Church is the country's largest non-governmental provider of health care, social services, and education, much of it in the inner cities. So who is hurt by this pushing of religious people out of the public square?
Do you see this as social engineering in the social outreach sphere?
I'm not entirely sure, but I would say that, what we're seeing socially is very positive with lay Catholics. I think, what the administration is trying to do in terms of social engineering, I don't know if it's successful. If anything, I would say it's probably invoked a backlash. Because I think people who may not have even been that interested in religious freedom are suddenly starting to say, okay, you've stepped a little bit too far. You're treading directly on the Constitution and on our rights. And so I'd say what we're seeing happening socially in this country in terms of the response is probably pretty positive.
What's the next step here? So Catholics go online, they read your 14-point plan, they put it into action. What next? What happens on the back end of this Fortnight for Freedom?
I think it's important to continue to educate ourselves about the broader threats to religious liberty. With the HHS mandate, the government has really kind of come crashing through this wall of separation between church and state to tell the church how to operate.
This has been going on progressively for a long time.
It has. And, we have the affairs of church here, we have the affairs of state here. And the two are sort of appropriately separated, but they ought to be working together for the common good. But what we've seen from this administration is that they're pushing the church out of the public square and saying you can only come into the public square if you leave your faith at the door or if you violate your conscience.
So what's the final message here for Catholics? What should they be doing?
Catholics should go to our website at www.thecatholicassociation.org, and if you haven't already, catch on to where we are in our 14-point action plan. And then, like Maureen said, to continue to educate yourselves and to be active, to speak out. If you were to look at the bishop's document, Our First Most Cherished Freedom, they outline some of the other challenges to religious freedom, specifically related to immigration, related to their human trafficking work. So when the fortnight ends, jump on to the next thing and start reading about it and speaking out.
And I don't think I gave out the number of the Capitol switchboard. No. Please pick up the phone and call before the 4th of July. It's 202-225-3121.
Very good. Thank you both for being here. To find out more about the Catholic Association and what's going on in your diocese during the Fortnight for Freedom, go to thecatholicassociation.org. Thanks again. Up next, he founded the Peace Corps and launched the war on poverty, but he was more importantly a faithful Catholic and a great father. Mark Shriver joins us to share the legacy of his father, Sargent Shriver, when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. My final guest is a member of the United States equivalent of the royal family. An accomplished politician and philanthropist, he works tirelessly on behalf of needy children as the Vice President of Programs for Save the Children USA. He's also the author of a new book, a moving memoir about his father, Sargent Shriver. It's entitled, A Good Man, Rediscovering My Father, Sargent Shriver. Please welcome to our program, Mark Shriver. Mark, great to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here.
Appreciate it.
people are so familiar with the accomplishments of your father. He's the man who founded the Peace Corps. He led Johnson's war on poverty.
Yes.
So many accomplishments, the ambassador to France, and the husband of Eunice Shriver, which is no small accomplishment.
Yes.
You, in this book, sort of unpacked the essence of this man. And when he passed away, so many people came up to you and said, he was a good man. What did that mean? What did you discover behind that accolade?
Well, you're right. A lot of folks claimed when he was alive that he was a great man for having created the Peace Corps, Head Start, Legal Services for the Poor, Job Corps, foster grandparents, Vista. But what they said to me after he died was that he was a good man, including the 2 women who used to serve him lunch, who waited in the line at the wake and said, your dad was a good man, and then turned around and walked out of the church. The guy from the U.S. Air Terminal who said the exact same thing. So I wanted to dig in and try to figure out what it meant to be good as compared to great. And when the lights are on and the cameras are on, and particularly in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of great people that aren't good. But Dad was the same, whether it was talking to Cardinal Wuerl or President Clinton or President Reagan or the waitresses at the restaurant. He treated them all the same, and I wanted to understand how he did that and did it so well and so joyfully.
Yeah, there was this boundless joy about him.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was a buoyant, happy fellow. And you discovered the source of that happiness, that optimism, and real affection. And we'll get into his fathering later, because I think so many of us struggle with, you know, how do you maintain your career, and you're supposed to accomplish all these things, and yet there are these little lives that we're in charge of for a small period of time, and how do you balance that? What was the source of that joy and the animating spirit behind this man?
Well, I think, you know, I tried to distill it down, and it came back to faith. I think it was the fact that he went to Mass every day of his life. I think he was raised in a family that believed in the Gospel's call for social justice, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked. His godfather was James Gibbons of Baltimore, the 2nd U.S. Cardinal. His grandfather had gone into the seminary and dropped out twice because he was sick both times. Became great friends with James Gibbons, and that was my dad's godfather. And I think that faith was tested in the Depression and in World War II, but I think it came out of those experiences even stronger. And I think that faith called for acts of hope and love, which is what I think his life was built on: faith, hope, and love.
You accompanied him many times to Mass. You would go to daily Mass with him, and then, of course, on Sunday. What was that like, and did he ever offer any counsel about, because let's face it, it's tough to get up at the crack of dawn and meet this obligation, decide I'm going to go to Mass every day. That's a tough ritual, and yet he maintained it.
He did it every day. It didn't matter whether he was on the road in this country or abroad. Wherever we checked into a hotel, the first question he'd ask is, what's the Mass schedule? So he wanted to go the next day. It was part of his routine, and it made him, I think when he got down on his knees and asked for help, he realized he wasn't God. And he realized that God was in charge and that he needed God's help. And I think one of the things he did tell me is that before he went to daily Mass, he'd spend 10 or 15 minutes getting ready for it. So it was a process of getting ready to go to Mass, then getting on your knees and understanding that you weren't God and asking for that help and support. And I think it fired him up. He came out of Mass every day excited for the day. And whether the day was just enjoying nature or whether it was enjoying the person in front of him. And that person could be a cab driver, the guy from the gas station, a grandchild, or a cardinal or a president of the United States. But he treated them all the same because he thought that they were really sent from God. Yeah. He really believed that. And I think he believed that God is either everywhere or God's nowhere. And he believed God was everywhere. And that made him excited, but also paradoxically slowed him down so that he could appreciate the moment.
Yeah, no, he was a man who, obviously you need a certain amount of ego to run for public office and to be in the public arena. But that said, he didn't crave it. He didn't crave the affection of the masses and wish to be the center of attention all the time.
No, definitely not. And I think the book is really a process of a son trying to figure out how his father lived that life, how he wasn't really a slave to his ambition and ego. He really thought in more of a cosmic frame, if you will. He wanted to be a good son of God.
It's a beautifully written book, and there's a portion here where you say, Dad was good because he was great in the smaller, unseen corners of life. Explain that.
That means that when you're on a TV set or you're a politician or you're a wealthy businessman, it's easy, I think, easier to be great because everybody's, you know, telling you wonderful things about yourself. When the lights go off and no one's paying attention, when you're at the gas station, when you're at the grocery store, are you the same to those people as you are to the big shots? And Dad was. He was consistent across the board. And I think that was because he saw everyone as a gift from God. And for this son, trying to figure that out so I can work with my wife of 20 years as we raise our 3 children, as we try to balance faith and family and friends and commitment to job, I needed to figure that out to do a better job as a father, as a husband, and as a friend.
I want to talk about his career and his parenting, but first I need to talk about your mother, Eunice Shriver, who is such a hero. The founder of the Special Olympics, really had this burning heart for people with disabilities throughout her life. You write, it's a funny story about when your father's the ambassador in France.
Yes.
Tell us about that. And
when my mother took the when they're training them.
Yeah, bringing people into the embassy. Tell us about that. And what? Yeah, and how that happened.
So mother believed that people with developmental disabilities ought to have access to the American embassy, just like the big shots in Paris or the big shots from all around the world did. So she brought in people with developmental disabilities, and they would train in the embassy or in the backyard, and they would roll in tires and do athletic drills in the American embassy in the late 60s in Paris, of all places. So she didn't believe in, isolating people.
Right.
And she wanted to bring people together, people with developmental disabilities, and expose them to all the things that other people had. And she knocked down the walls of misunderstanding and prejudice. You got to remember, in the late 60s, most people with developmental disabilities were locked in institutions,
right,
forgotten and isolated.
Shut it away.
And she knocked those walls down, and Dad supported her, because I think that's what love demanded. And you got to remember, at that point in time, it's even a more male-oriented society than we have today, where the man is supposed to be out front taking all the credit. And Dad let Mother do that. I don't know whether he let her. I mean, Maria, my sister, said in her eulogy of Mom that Dad let her rip and roar. I don't know whether he let her rip or roar, or whether she was going to rip and roar on her own. But it worked. It was a great partnership. And I think, again, Mother went to Mass every day of her life. So I think it's that common,
they had
desire.
They had that common faith, and that, in the hard times, that sustains you.
It sustains you in the happy times and in the tough times. And I think that's what pulled them through 56 years of marriage.
Yeah, one of the things I took from the book, the joy of this man. I mean, he's out playing on the lawn with you guys. Tell that great story from the 60s, where your brother Timmy falls, and your uncle Bob Kennedy is there, Bobby Kennedy.
Yes.
Tell that story.
Well, the only addition is that was my brother Bobby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, but they're both
Bobby.
older brothers, no problem. And Bobby fell. I was about 4 or 5 at the time, so Bobby was about 13, 14. He started to cry. And Uncle Bobby Kennedy said, "You can't cry. Kennedys don't cry." And Daddy scooped up Bobby and said, "Don't worry about it. You can cry. You're a Shriver." And I think the story was that he was comfortable with emotions. He was comfortable with the fact that you could cry. That was normal. He was comfortable with unconditional love. When my brother Bobby screwed up and got arrested for smoking pot, and it was all over the front page of the paper, Dad brought him into his room and looked him in the eye and said, "Look, you're a good kid. I love you. This is going to work out fine. Don't listen to what anybody else says." And I think, when Dad was considering running for governor or maybe even president, and the family was on the front page of the paper, he just offered his kid unconditional love and forgiveness. And the same thing happened to me when I backed out of the Peace Corps. The very entity he created, I backed out. And he just said, "Well, how can I be helpful to you? How can I help you with your career?" And when a son feels that, or a daughter feels that unconditional love, there's really nothing you can't do, because your father is behind you, because he loves you regardless of what you're going to do.
Yeah, well, he told your brother after that spectacular, all the coverage of this, and it was possession of, marijuana, but the coverage was intense, and it was front page story, and he tells him, "Don't worry. Come here, I'll take care of you.
Right.
It'll be fine."
Yeah.
But there was that great line he put in the public release about he'll make manly restitution.
Yes. And Bobby, when he eulogized him, used the word, this is how he had always seen manliness. And I thought it was really interesting. I noticed those two words in there juxtaposed against each other. And I think Dad saw manliness as the ability to love and to forgive your kid, not to yell at your child, to support your wife in whatever she wants to do. And for a lot of men in this country, that's a different vision of what manliness is. We've got to be the alpha male. We've got to yell at our kids and dominate our family. And Dad didn't see it that way. And I think he was happily married for 56 years, got 5 kids who love him. And for me, raising 3 kids with my wife, I wanted to learn that, to see how it would be a different type of man, one that was full of love and unconditionally.
Let's talk for a moment about, you were there when he dropped out of the 1976 presidential run. It was at the National Press Club.
Yes.
And you took a lesson from that moment. What was it? Tell us about it.
Well, we got in the car and went on the airplane, and the Secret Service men came over and made Dad sign some paperwork, and then they walked off the airplane. The doors close, and it's over. they're gone. When you land, you're getting your own cab, you're picking up your own bags, you don't have Secret Service protection. And what I took away from that was that when push comes to shove in politics, you know, there are a lot of people that tell you great things about you, but as soon as you lose, you're done.
You're out.
You're out. And what's really important is your faith, your relationship with your friends and your family, and the work you're trying to do. But all the adulation and the people telling you how wonderful you are really is gone the day you're out. And I don't think that affected Dad, because I don't think he really ever listened to that.
Yeah, you said he had a spiritual confidence about him, even in the midst of, you know, letting go of his big dream, really.
I think so. I don't know whether that was his big dream. I think he wanted to do it because I think he saw at that moment that that was an opportunity to try to make the country a better place. I think the next day after the election's over, honestly, he just never complained and moaned about the loss. He was ready to do something new, and that could be anything for him. You know, whatever opportunity came forward, he was ready to pursue it.
Tell me about this notion of peace that he had, that one could go out and be a creator of peace. I'm involved with a little boy's cause, Matty Stepanek, and his cause for sainthood, which is just starting, and he considered himself a peace advocate.
Yes.
There's some of that I see in your father. He not only thought we could be creators of peace, he created this core of people. What was the intention, and where did that come from? How is that related to his Catholic faith?
Well, I think he saw his experiences in college when he went in an experiment for international living and saw how much he learned by being exposed to different cultures and coming back to go to college and to beyond that about what he could bring back to America. And I think he thought that if he did that and it gave that opportunity to other young Americans and people of all ages really in America, that they would not only help the countries they were serving, but just as importantly, they'd come back and make America more diverse, more understanding, a richer place to live. And I think that's proven out. I think he'd be disappointed that there's only 9,000 Peace Corps volunteers. He'd be very proud that Teddy Shriver, my nephew, is serving in Peru right now.
Oh, really?
Yes, but I think he'd want more because I think he saw it was a way to express America's best values, that we were willing to serve. And as he said in a speech at the mall here in Washington on the 25th anniversary, serve, 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 for in the end it'll be the servants who save us all. So I think that idea of serving, whether you were a Peace Corps volunteer or a VISTA volunteer or a Special Olympics volunteer.
That was at the center of his life.
Yeah, definitely, and that was giving of yourself. He said this at a class, he gave it a speech at the Yale.
I was just about to mention the speech.
Yeah, to break the mirrors, you know, and I think he challenged the Yale graduates to break their mirrors, to stop looking at themselves as much as they were, and start looking at their neighbors. Look at the people with developmental disabilities, the poor person who may live outside your neighborhood. And I think that was really his call, was to break your mirrors and start looking at others, to build those bridges of understanding and acceptance, and instead of focusing on your bank account and your annuities.
Tell me about his many gifts as a father, and we're talking about your father, Sargent Shriver. He was a great note writer. Tell us about this and the impact it had on you as a child.
He wrote notes when I was in high school and slipped them under the door almost every day. You know, what he had read.
Say? What would they be?
It was everything
about?
From a box score in a baseball game to the dinner conversation. When I got a little older, there were notes were accompanying a book by Gary Wills or Elie Wiesel or Cardinal Lustiger. I mean, you know, Henry Nouwen. They were every type of book. And he'd mark the margins about the great parts that he thought were really relevant. And he'd encourage you to read the book. It may be somebody you bumped into on the street. But what he was doing was showing love and interest in his kids. And he was challenging you intellectually, trying to push you spiritually by slipping these notes or mailing one or two a day after I'd been married. My wife, you know, our mail went down a lot after Dad got sick with Alzheimer's because we didn't get those 2 letters every day. You know, sometimes it'd be 2, 3 a day.
Wow.
Just you know, updates on what the family was doing, some thoughts he had. And they weren't text or emails. They were handwritten notes.
Handwritten notes.
On legal paper. And I put one in the back of the book, the note he wrote me when I graduated from high school, which was very powerful, I found, when I went back and researched the book.
Yeah, you want to share it with people? It's a beautiful letter.
Sure. It just says, happy graduation day, Mark, and congratulations. Always remember that you are a unique, infinitely valuable person. Your mother and I love you. So do your brothers and sisters and friends. But all of our love and interest put together cannot compare with the passion and interest and love God himself showers on you. You are his. He wants you, and he will make you the perfect man you want to be. Love, Daddy. And what struck me about that was, you'd think that on a graduation day you'd tell your kid to work hard in college and his dreams would come true, that America was the land of opportunity. And what he wrote was, God loves you, and your brothers and your sisters and your mother, and I love you. And I think he felt, which is true, that if you know you're loved, you can do anything. And that's the message he wanted to get over to an 18-year-old kid, and it's reassuring to a 48-year-old man, too.
There's a great line in the book that I love. And you wrote, I grew up with faith, hope, and love as explicit topics in my household and with my father, who embodied and lived by those three tenets. In what way does he still represent those three tenets for you?
I think in the notes that he wrote, in the lessons he taught my kids, my dad suffered from Alzheimer's the last 10 years of his life, and our oldest is 14. We have a girl who's 14, Molly, a son, Tommy's 12, and Emma, who's 7. So they know my dad. They didn't know him really well, but I remember when he turned 93, he was cleaning off his, he took the last scoopful of cake, and he had Alzheimer's and a little problem with his knees. And Tommy was, at that point, 9 or 10. And Dad got up, took his plate, and walked into the kitchen and started, cleaning his dish. And my son looked at me, took a last forkful of ice cream, and took his plate and went into the kitchen, too. And he was learning from his grandfather at 93 that regardless of how old you are or how infirm you are, you can help. And I think that's the message my kids got. They also got a sense of his joyfulness. He would play catch with them even a couple of weeks before he died, and he'd start to throw it to one and give him a head fake and throw it to the other one, and he'd laugh.
Wow.
So they know that he had a joyful side to him, but that you also had to help out around the house and be a good man.
This long 10-year battle with Alzheimer's, I know must have been wrenching for you to be a part of. You asked him at one point, there were, as people, I don't know, those who aren't familiar with Alzheimer's, it is a terrible disease, but it comes and goes. There are moments of lucidity, and then they don't remember how to tie their tie or their shoelaces. You ask your father at one point, and you're driving along, or I think you're driving, and you ask, you're losing your mind, Dad. How are you doing with that? And what does he say?
He says, I'm doing the best I can with what God has given me. And I reflected back on that, and I think that that's the way he lived his life. Whether he was given the chance to survive the Depression after his family lost all their money, whether it was surviving World War II, whether it was, arranging the Kennedy funeral, which Jackie Kennedy asked him to do on a Friday afternoon for Monday, and he had to organize not only the mass, but all these foreign dignitaries and all of that work. I think he always did the best he could with what God had given him. And he realized in joyful times and in sad times to keep pushing ahead. And he realized he wasn't God. And he realized that these were gifts from God. And that's what I think, made him so joyful every day and so driven to try to make a difference. He realized he was trying to do God's will.
He married into this political dynasty in so many ways. Did they thwart his political career, do you think? There's a lot of speculation that they did.
The answer is Dad never complained once about it to me. And
what is your gut, though?
As I wrote in the book, in vino veritas, he had a couple of drinks with my friends, he had a couple of drinks with the family around, and he never complained. He never said, I got shortchanged by the family. He loved my mom, got along with his brother-in-laws and his sister-in-laws, and I think was grateful for the opportunity that God had given him. And just as he said, I'm doing the best I can with what God's given me, he got the chance to start the Peace Corps. He got the chance to work with Vice President Johnson to create the Peace Corps and then to run the war on poverty. So I think, he never complained, so I'm not going to complain for him. He was joyful for, his marriage of 56 years. He dated my mom for 7 years, so he clearly married the woman of his dreams.
No, he had an incredible life.
And he did the best he could with what God has given him, so I don't know. I mean, you can read it in the history books that his career was thwarted, but that's spilt milk as far as I'm concerned, and he never complained about it, so I'm not gonna.
I want to talk about the last lesson your father gave you, and it was when you were arranging his funeral.
Yes.
And he asked to be buried in a Trappist sack.
Trappist burlap sack, yes.
But we don't allow that in the United States, so you had to make some accommodations.
Yes, so I researched and found that the Trappists were making coffins in Iowa, I believe. And so I called the guy up and went through what they offered, and I ended up buying the plainest one they have. And it's just I think it's a pine box, just simply a pine box. And I often thought, as I was sitting there getting ready for the mass, people would think we were cheap. And then I realized that really his life was trying to keep it simple. and to focus on what was important. When you went into his rooms, there were pictures of his mother and father, of Cardinal Gibbons, of St. Thomas More, you know, St. Joan of Lustager, I believe, quotes on the wall, and, you know, crucifix and rosary beads. And that was it. You know, no pictures of him with famous people, none of the pictures of him with presidents or cardinals. Kept it simple, and that's what he wanted in death. And he taught me that, you know, what was really important was your faith. And it's not to be buried in a fancy box or to have all these fancy pictures. It's to do what was right, and that's to have a relationship with God. And I think that's what really, as I said, gave him all of his energy.
What is the lasting lesson that you wish the rest of the world to know and to take with them, particularly fathers?
You know, it's tough. I don't go to Mass every day. I mean, I go every Sunday. I try to go a couple times during the week. I think what his life really was about was that commitment to faith, and that he made that a #1 priority, and that his kids felt that, and clearly his wife did, and he married a woman who believed the same thing. And I think that when you have that foundation, you can really do anything. As corny as that sounds, I believe it. And I think that his faith demanded including everybody. It demanded including Jews and Protestants and Catholics and Muslims. It demanded the atheists, all to try to do, as he said, our Father's business, capital O, capital F. And he said that as a public sector person in 1966. And I think our Father's business is to help the poor, to feed the hungry, and to clothe the naked. And that's what he called. So I guess the one message is, I hope people, maybe they write their kids a couple more notes, slip them under the door so it shows that you are caring about your children.
That's one of the little tricks I said, you know, I have to start doing that. It's a great...
Because they see that you care about it. Yeah,
right.
It's not an email or a text in some hieroglyphic language. It's really that you sat down and took it out, your pen out, and wrote your kid a note. And I think, you know, the faith thing is clearly the most important part of his life.
The centerpiece.
Centerpiece.
Tell me how this has bled, and it really is his faith, that bled over into the lives of his children and into your life as you really follow his example in your work with Save the Children. Tell me what you're doing there and what people need to know about it.
Well, Save the Children's been around for about 80 years. I run their U.S. programs. We're in about 200 schools across the country, primarily in rural America, working with kids that are living in poverty, trying to get them ready for kindergarten, for the young kids, so that they are ready to learn. And then for the older kids, 1st through 3rd graders, we're making sure they're reading at grade level. And they're living healthy lifestyles, trying to get them physical activity programs and nutritious snacks. So we're trying to get kids emotionally, cognitively, intellectually ready to go to school.
And you also got a public-private partnership.
We do, absolutely. So we're not relying on the government for all of our funding, and we're not relying on the private sector as well. We have a blend of funding from businesses, corporations, foundations, as well as the government, a small amount of state and federal money. So it's a combination of a public-private partnership that has great results, making a difference in poor kids' lives.
Mark Shriver, thanks so much for being here. It is a splendid book. The book is A Good Man, Rediscovering My Father, Sargent Shriver by Mark Shriver. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online. And you can find out more about Save the Children USA by visiting savethechildren.org. Well, that is all the time we have, but the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. There you'll find the latest news, some commentary, and previews of what's upcoming on the world over. And don't miss our World Over Live this Thursday with Mitt Romney, and we'll analyze the Supreme Court's health care decision for you. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.